musicologists? Welcome to Amari Music Talk. I'm Richard Cole. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're a long-time listener, welcome back. All right, so it's been a little space between the previous episode and this one. Of course, we've had a lot of heavy stuff going on, losing major influences in the music world. Changes in the world in general. A lot of heavy stuff going on, but ready to dive back into it, especially with our losing our major entertainers. There's Sly Stone, Brian Wilson, Ananda Lewis, Pepe Willie, so many. And what's so sad, it's too many to cover in a single episode. Right. But this is Richard Cole from the future, breaking into this episode. I was talking about a lot of the people that we lost, left out probably one of the most important influences musically for me, and that's Walter Scott of the Whispers, who passed away recently at 81. The Whispers were my gateway into that whole Solar Records roster of artists. It was And the Beat Goes On. That I remember hearing that on the radio, and I mean, I was just blown away. And then to find out that Leon Silvers was behind that record made it even more exciting, and that drew me into Dynasty's I Just Begun to Love You. That was the second Solar record I've heard. Now, I mean, of course, I heard Shalimar before then, second time around, and I did like that record a lot. But kind of once I found out they were all on the same label, just made it more exciting to me. But it was definitely, the Whispers. Like I said, And the Beat Goes On was the first, and I went and got most of the albums after that. Love Is Where You Find It is probably my personal favorite album. Love for Love had some great tracks on it. Like This Time, Just Keep On Loving Me on that album. Like I said, the title track, Love for Love Tonight. But like I said, Love Is Where You Find It Within the Raw, Emergency, Say Yes. So many hits. Just Gets Better with Time. That's another favorite. Just way too many to mention, but I thought I'd break in and just talk about that. But like I said, we're going to spotlight a lot of these artists. But let's get back to the show. But as far as like Sly and the Family Stone, I had done videos in and around the Sly Lives documentary. So if you haven't had a chance to check those out. And of course, always more Sly and the Family Stone that's coming. There'll be a Pepe Willie episode going to talk about 94 East. If not the episode after this one, it will be coming up soon. So be on the lookout for that. And like I said, we'll acknowledge a lot of the players that we've lost, and continue to, spotlight their records, not just in the Prince world, but like I said, in music general, lots of major influences. But with that down, we're going to dive into today's episode, which is kind of a continuation from the previous episode. As I was doing that episode, we had, news that was coming in while I was recording it. There was news coming in while I was editing it. There was news coming in, as I was uploading it. And then, of course, in the days that followed, there was a little bit more clarification on some things. We finally, the estate, they got a schedule, they have a plan now, and, we got some things to look forward to. And for me, there is a lot. Probably not going to cover everything, but there's 4 major things I do want to look at. And of course, obviously, we've got the Around the World in a Day, that Super Deluxe. I know originally it was announced that it wasn't going to be a Super Deluxe, but it may be a Super Deluxe. I kind of hope that is a super deluxe, but I think the consensus from the estate during celebration was that they are going to focus on releases large and small, and probably a lot of things in between. So while everything won't be a big box set, I do think as far as like the classic material, that is kind of a no-brainer to do for a box set. Kind of as you get into some of the later era, like some of the 90s, like I said, like Gold Experience or Come or Emancipation. I don't think those should be box sets just due to the fact that there was so much overlap. So like a box set covering that material in a re-release of the original albums remastered, that would be cool. But yeah, Around the World in a Day is one that I'm definitely looking forward to. At first, I mean, it wasn't one of my favorite albums, but it's one that I still play, and there are tracks that I love from it. And again, it's the B-sides I enjoy a lot more than the album as a whole. But as far as what was recorded during that time, and that was kind of some of it during the Purple Rain sessions, some of it was after Purple Rain had come out and before the tour, and then there were some things, right before the album's release that I think would make some excellent vault material that you can include that would make this probably one of the jewels of Prince Super Deluxe box sets. All right, so before we dive any further into this, I do want to kind of give some shout outs here. Let's see, not this one yet, that'll be the second. All right. So again, like I said, thanks very much for tuning in. Continue to like, subscribe. Let's even help this one get 1,000 likes and more. But I want to shout out to one of our listeners, Dennis. It says, thank you for doing what you do. This is an interesting version of Free, talking about my review of Free from the last episode, the acoustic version that the estate dropped during celebration, and I love it. But it is not International Lover, and I always thought that the song was ahead of its time, even for Prince. I am subscribing because you know what's good. Hey, and I gotta thank you for that. Now, of course, everything's subjective, so what I think is good and great, there's some people that might not think so, but glad you think so definitely appreciate that. I had the wonderful fortune of seeing him at his last Atlanta show. They landed before making it back to Paisley Park because Prince was unresponsive. They apparently got him good enough to go home, and he was gone in a week. Yeah, that was, I don't know. Might have to cover that in a future episode, but yeah, that news of him on the plane, that was, that it was kind of like, they still didn't think it was quite the end, but for somebody like Prince, that type of news, even that was heavy enough. And then you fast forward to a week later, and kind of here we are now. Okay, so it was another life-changing experience. I saw him 26 times, and that still wasn't enough. Hey, you got me beat. I saw him 5 times, and probably everything else was like some, video or bootleg video or something like that. But yeah, 26 times, now that's dedication. And again, thank you for doing what you do. Asking, what is your favorite Prince album? I would say, hands down to this day, it's still Sign of the Times. Probably with maybe 1999 and Artificial Age as a tie for second place. So, but I'll get into that in another episode as well. Let's see, and perhaps the best time I ever saw him was in a club in Atlanta. It was just after his son passed. It was a 2,000 seat show. black tie, and evening gowns. I would watch that show every day for the rest of my life. It was on another level, even for Prince. I am currently looking forward to a CD-ROM that I had many years ago. It was interesting, and it was connected to love for one another. And so he kind of goes into more detail about the CD-ROM, which was interactive. CD-ROM, I think it came out like 94, I think it was. My best friend had that CD-ROM, loaned it to me, played that game, figured out how to get all the way to the end. And, it was cool little game, for computers back then. I don't know, like younger generation, I don't know if you can kind of fathom how, compared to now was kind of primitive. But for us, that was like next level. And I mean, somebody like Prince to have, the insight to come out with something like that was amazing. Had, continued to live with a lot of the innovations going on, and with him owning the masters, there's no telling what new heights or what new ideas he would have been able to present. So, but yeah, actually I still have that game. Of course, my friend knows I still have the game, but I mean, you can't play it really on a computer now. Even if you connect a CD player to your desktop or your laptop, I don't think it's playable now. But I don't know if they can remaster that, or I don't know, maybe, I know Prince's friend, if you remember watching that podcast, I know Eloy, he's great at game designing. I think he works for a game developer, or he's in business as a game developer. But, if the estate could reach out to him and like maybe try to come up with a idea for like a Prince themed video game. It doesn't have to be shoot 'em up necessarily. I mean, it'd be cool, like maybe some science fiction, but I'm kind of digressing, but that might be a good idea to reach out for that. But anyway, but yeah, thanks Dennis for reaching out, and continue to watch the show. And like I said, there's going to be more Prince episodes coming down on Amari Music Talk. All right, and now we're going to go to another listener. Let's see. This is the Prolific Network. All right. And Prolific Network says that the only thing that's annoying me now is all this re-releasing of music we already heard. The best thing about being a Prince fan was anticipating something you've never heard before, and a style that you would never suspect he would use. That's what made Prince, and these estate executives want to play, Not to Lose My Favorite Release since he's been gone, which is, okay, so the estate executives want to play Not to Lose My Favorite, Not to Lose My Favorite Prince release since he's been gone is I can't talk. The Deliverance EP, and my favorite song I heard after he was gone. But what I haven't heard before was All My Dreams. But that's what they don't get about Prince. They're stifling his creative spirit by releasing all this stuff we already heard. That's not what Prince is about. He's about innovation, and we need to hear some stuff we haven't heard from the vault. Okay. All right. And thanks, the Prolific Network, for sending that in. Yeah, I mean, Prince fan base, it really, in its ways, it's unique. But at the same time, it's no different than anybody else's, legacy artist, fans of a legacy artist. You know, whether it's the Beatles, whether it's Hendrix, whether it's Frank Zappa, whether it's Bob Dylan. You know, somebody's going to feel left out the pool at some point. You know, it's like, you know, whether it's Beatles, whether it's Bob Dylan or whoever, you know, whenever they drop a box set or some type of vault thing, and it's, you know, fans will get on there and like, oh, they didn't release take 23 of that particular one, or, oh, why didn't they put out track or take 4? Take 4 was better than what was on the album, and, you know, you're gonna get that. All I can say I know when it comes to Prince, I think right now Prince is the youngest as far as, you know, an artist, and especially an artist that's no longer with us, to where you got the legacy, you know. I know Frank Zappa, while he was still alive in the early 90s, you know, he had this thing called Beat the Boots, where he would actually, you know, figure out, you know, like, here's the bootleg version of what somebody put out. So he would actually get those tracks from his vault and, you know, master or remaster those, and even go so far as copying the artwork of the bootleggers, and would put it out himself, you know, so that way, you know, fans can get material at, you know, a reasonable price, and it's good quality recordings. So, you know, he was a champion of beating the bootleggers while he was alive, and even after his passing in 93. Again, you know, another estate in controversy, but for the most part, it didn't overshadow what was being released. I mean, for about, let's see, 90s, 2000s. So I would say maybe 20 some odd years. There wasn't a problem with the flow of releases and what was coming out, or even a lot of times the quality. But I think it kind of hit ahead due to some controversy with the will. Also, what else was there? There was a documentary that was hindered for a few years. I think that kind of brought things to a head as far as the family members squabbling, but they managed to squash their beef. They all cashed out, which was originally Frank Zappa's intentions. He didn't want his wife or his kids to have to bother with the vault or anything. You know, his original instructions and his original will was, look, sell this catalog, cash out, because the music industry is a headache and it's a pain. So, but they cashed out, and now the Zappa estate's back to its regular flow of releases. But like I said, we're talking from before 93, when he was still alive, managing his vault and putting out vault material. And after, with the family, you know, not only dealing with the original albums, but any box sets, compilations, live albums, things of that nature. So Prince, like I said, this estate, you know, it's still in its infancy. You know, we're almost approaching 10 years, but I would say it's near the end of its infancy, and now it's kind of getting to a place to where it's ready for the next stage. As far as stuff that we've already heard, again, with the fan base, you got two different things going on. You've got your diehard fan and you got your casual fan. And even with that, you kind of have a subgenre of classic fan versus, and I'm kind of basing this off of, I was at the Pop Goes the 60s podcast, because the host of that show did an episode about Paul McCartney, and it's like, there are these fans, the classic rock era Paul McCartney, which is everything from his first solo record till about roughly 1981, 82, 83. And then there's the uber Paul McCartney fan, which is like, oh, they just love every single thing that Paul McCartney put out since 1983, which that becomes even more subjective than the classic period. So that's a subgenre. Even with Prince, there's a classic Prince period, and then there's like this uber Prince period. And somewhere in the middle is probably somebody like me, where, yeah, I grew up in the 80s. You know, that was my teenage years. Became a Prince fan at 15, 1981. Dirty Mind was the gateway. Went back, played catch up with For You in the second album. And then, but from Dirty Mind forward was the fan. So, as you know, I'm turning 16, 17, 18, 19. Every album, yeah, as it was unfolding in real time, just like the rest of us that were around that generation, first generation Prince fans, yeah, of course, we're going to cling to that. That's our memories. That's, what drew us in. Now, where I kind of go in the middle is because to me, although the whole name change was a little bit off-putting, and it was like we knew what he was doing, but to the world at large, they were painting him as crazy and all this other stuff. But to me, that 93 to like 95, 96, to me, as I'm getting older, late 20s, going into 30s, that period to me was just as exciting as the classic period. And I feel like I'm one of those that grow up with him. But now, that being said, not every album I enjoyed. Not, or some albums may have had 2 or 3 tracks that either I love or like, okay, that's a cool track. But I'm not heralding every single post 1996 album is like, oh, this is greater than 1999, or it's greater than, and just like even with the classic period, Around the World in a Day wasn't quite my favorite, but it did let me know that we're not getting the same Prince twice. And that's how I've approached every single album since then. Okay, if I didn't like Planet Earth, okay, then, here comes Lotus Flower and Minneapolis Sound, which to me, Lotus Flower technically is the more superior album. There are things I enjoy on Minneapolis Sound, but, to me, it's not a strong album. So there, that's just how it is. That's really, I think, some or most of us are kind of in that middle. It's not like, oh, we're having a midlife crisis, so therefore we're holding on to the 80s for dear life. And at the same time, we're not so close-minded to a brand new day that we can't enjoy where his mentality was at. We can't enjoy, what his decisions were. And really, a lot of those decisions, he felt that he didn't have to play the music industry game where everything has to be this calculated hit. He didn't have to compete on that level. It's like, look, I feel like making this kind of a sound today, and I want to put these collection of sounds together. This is the album, and I feel that these songs go together on an album. And again, whether you like it or whether you don't like it, that's again, that's subjective. But that being said as well, I don't think that your favorite album or your favorite track is going to get ignored. I don't think it's going to get swept under the rug. I look at it like this: every single artist, whatever their classic period is, I'm sorry, that was the period that, number one, made them a lot of money. Number two, it's the absolute selling point, especially if you are a legacy artist. Probably the only exception is Jimi Hendrix, because Jimi Hendrix only had 4 major releases in his lifetime. So you can only go so far with 4 releases. That being said, everything that really the estate has done since 2010 with the re-release of the original albums, everything since then has been vault material. Mostly live material. There is studio tracks in the vault that they're curating. There is stuff even to this day that they still discover. You know, somebody's got a tape in the closet somewhere, or somebody found a a reel to reel master tape in an attic somewhere that somebody had stuff that the estate didn't have before. All of that. And they also embrace the fan recordings of material. They got a subsidiary label that deals with, okay, well, we don't have a master tape of that particular performance, but you know, hey, this kid that was there in 1969 recorded this on his little reel to reel. We're gonna pay that kid for, well, he's not a kid anymore, but we're gonna pay that guy or that girl for that tape, and we're gonna release that. I don't know if the Prince estate will be that broad-minded, but again, I don't think that your favorite release will get ignored. If you want the perfect example, Google what Bob Dylan's legacy releases are. Every single era of his is pretty much covered. Yeah, and it's not like a big, I think a lot of his classic period did get a lot of attention, but I think there were some years where you had a 60s album, a classic album released as a box set or whatever major release, and then you would have something from either the 80s or the 90s. I think he's even had stuff in the 2000s that were, just as strong as anything he's ever done in his entire career. But I think those fans do get a good balance. And as Prince fans, we will get a good balance of that material. So, it's just a matter of patience. I think, now when I look at other estates, especially the Beatles, because there's a lot of different podcasts I watch on that too. I think now what is different is that I think we're starting to get, or they're starting to get, to a point of where it's like, okay, there's 2 Beatles left. It's just a matter of time. Unfortunately, it's just a matter of time, and they're preparing themselves for that. And, it's, I don't know. It's just with the Prince estate, it just seems like we're the most impatient. We're way younger than a lot of those people that were first generation fans of any of those artists in the 60s. And, it seems like they're the most scared of like, well, I'm not going to, you can't live in fear of this stuff. You can only take care of yourself the best way that you can. Whatever music that you do have possession of, whether it's an official release or whether it's still in bootleg form, cherish that. There's been a lot of moments where it felt like we weren't going to get a Prince release ever again in this stage, with the way the estate was beefing or what Netflix was doing. So, it will happen. But I think due to the main topic of this episode, I think the smartest move to make is this release of Around the World in a Day. Hopefully they're bumping up Purple Rain for the 50th anniversary, since, again, I think probably Netflix, killed the momentum on a Purple Rain 40th. But I think Around the World in a Day is a logical release. I think their plan is solid. You got stuff for Record Store Day. We'll talk about that in a few. We've got, Hit and Run Phase 1 and 2 for Record Store Day. We've got, potentially Piano and a Microphone, which, hopefully we'll have that somewhere soon. That would be nice. But, you just gotta, it's going to take some time and it's going to take patience, especially if you've had all kind of legal stuff holding you up. Again, there might be some people, it's what Prince wanted. Or this is what Prince didn't want. And it's like, again, I'm sorry. He's not here anymore in physical form. And in relation to that, because we don't have him in physical form, sometimes the universe, the universe, it chooses that one. There's only one Michael Jackson. There's only one Prince. There's only one, that artist that's at that upper echelon. You've got artists that are great, but there's very few that's so one of a kind, you know. Yeah, granted, Ohio Players were one of a kind, but in the grand scheme, there were other funk bands on that level. Kool and the Gang at one point, but Sly Stone was that upper echelon of artists. James Brown, they were the central figures. They were the visionaries. You had, everybody has a key person. Sly, Larry Graham was a key essential. And even though Larry Graham had gone on to do great things with Graham Central Station, he still wasn't Sly. I'm sorry. As much as I love Larry Graham and Graham Central Station, he was a key player. He wasn't, he's good at what he does. He's, as far as innovation, the bass, yes, definitely. But not the type of songwriter that Sly was. And that's not putting him down, but that's just how it is. But he was a key player. The JBs, whether it's Fred Wesley, Maceo Parker, key players, but they couldn't visualize. That was the thing. And I think, it was the James Brown documentary, Fred Wesley pointed that out, where it's like, James had such a clear vision. And it's like, okay, well, I want you to play this part, and not musically, but hey, you're going to play a part in this vision. You're going to have a part in this vision. I want you to execute this, and this exactly the way I execute it. But it's like, no, James, you're one of a kind. They couldn't do what James did, even on their best day, because he was the visionary. This was his dream. This was his goal and his work ethic. Same thing with Prince. It's like that was a one of a kind visionary. He had all kind of key players, whether it's Morris Day here, whether it's Shirley E there, whether it's Andre Simone over here. But it was his vision, his work ethic, that's that thing that couldn't be duplicated. That's what put him, as the Jackson 5 were great together. The Jacksons were great together, but Michael was up here. So it was inevitable for him to do what he did. So many different examples that I can, put forth on that. So when, Prince had those visionary ideas back in the 90s about, the way he predicted the way the internet would go, the way music would go, like streaming the way that it is now, or downloads as it was early on. That was the important thing. That was his single vision. Nobody else in the MPG could fathom that. All they could do is like, okay, hey, I'm Michael B. I'm the drummer. I'm going to drum my behind off to help him get to where he needs to be. But it was Prince, again, with his work ethic. It's his vision. This isn't the Beatles where it's four guys. Like I said, you take Ringo out of the equation, regardless of how great Paul McCartney, Paul and John Lennon were as songwriters. You take Ringo out of that equation, that magic doesn't hit. You take George Harrison out of that equation. You take Paul. It had to be all four of them together. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. Or if it didn't end up being those four, it never would have happened. Not in the way you think. Again, it needed to be those four. But unfortunately for James Brown, there's no four guys. There's just James. For Prince, there's no four guys. It's just Prince. For Michael, yeah, he had the Jackson 5, but they just didn't, and again, not putting them down, but they didn't execute. They just didn't execute. So as far as not having that innovative spirit, I'm sorry, it's just not there with the estate. And to me, I think that's more Primary Wave's job to come up with innovative ways to get the music out beyond the records, beyond the box sets, beyond streaming. I think that's Primary Wave to come up with those kind of new age things to do with the music. But as far as the music itself, as far as releases, again, I think right now the smart move, like I said, there's a lot of money lost when there was no product or when the product was hindered. You know how much money that was lost not doing Purple Rain's 40th anniversary properly. You know, sure, Andrea Swinson made her money with the book. You know, hopefully that was the case. But as far as like, since there was no release of any kind except the splattered vinyl for Purple Rain, the album, I don't know what that was selling like, but that was a lot of money lost. You know, the Netflix documentary, a lot of money lost. So right now, to make sure your favorite release gets out there, then yeah, you got to put out that Around the World in a Day box set. You got to put out that Parade box set next year. You have to. You have to. You know, you got to recoup somehow. You know, hopefully this Broadway thing will kick off. Hopefully Ryan Coogler's movie will pay off. But as far as records, to, you know, it's like the record industry. Your major artist, you know, whether it's a Beyonce or whether it's a Taylor Swift, that money that they generate selling, you know, triple, quadruple platinum or whatever it is they sell, that compensates for that one album they put out by so-and-so that flopped. That, you know, or here's this little small band, this is their first album, and it's like they didn't even sell 250,000 copies. So therefore the record company's losing money on that artist. Well, that Beyonce album, because it's selling millions, that covers up that loss. You know, same thing with movies. For, you know, if you just only care about independent movies or original movies and don't like Marvel and don't like Star Wars or don't like this franchise or that franchise, well, when that franchise makes millions, you know, hundreds of millions, then, you know, that helps finance that independent movie, or that helps like, oh, hey, this is original IP. Okay, well, hey, you know what it costs, like 10 million. Okay, cool. Here you go. 10 million. We got it. 'Cause, you know, Superman made $1 billion at the box office or something like that. That's just how it goes. And that's how, you know, it's show business. It's not like, let's, you know, of course we as the fans are important, but, you know, they're not really, you know, they're listening to us in a way. Like I said, with what they announced at Celebration and the way that they talk to the fans at Celebration with those announcements, was definitely a step in the right direction. But again, at the end of the day, it's whatever is going to make that business a viable business at the end of the day. So, all right. That's that in a nutshell. But yes, definitely thank you for, you know, for making that comment on YouTube. And like I said, those type of comments help. So we kind of covered Around the World in a Day, which to me, you know, outside of Parade, I was looking, you know, Sign of the Times, Parade, are probably like my, you know, two favorite albums of that period. But like I said, with depending on how they pick the vault material for Around the World in a Day, I think you got a definite, you know, contender to be one of the strongest Super Deluxe editions in the history of Prince Super Deluxe editions now and then. And I think, you know, if they do it right, that may be a strong contender. You know, Sign of the Times, although wasn't perfect, but at least we got a Prince Sign of the Times Super Deluxe. 1999, couple of tracks, you know, that key tracks that are missing that fans want. That's 2 tracks shy of it being perfect. I'll take the word for it. I've heard both tracks. I agree with the assessment. You could probably edit those in a way to take out the controversial material out of that. Or, you know, young generation, stop being so dang sensitive. You know, again, think, research, do your homework. Just don't accept the Twitter, you know, X posts and say, oh, this song is bad. This song is evil. Well, go listen to it. Go figure out why it's evil, or if you think it's evil, or find out if it's even evil at all. Go check it out. Do some research. It's like these are songs that was written by a 20-something-year-old dude back in 1980s. It freaks me out now, which why I'm glad I have a lot of stuff on physical media, or I watch a lot of stuff on streaming, because there's a lot of stuff that you see on whatever regular cable channels. You see a movie now and it was made in the 80s or the 90s or something like that, and then you got to put a dang disclaimer on it talking about, yes, this film may contain sensitive material. Well, it wasn't like we didn't already know it was sensitive. It's like, and we were smart enough to know, like, okay, that's the movie. That writer's trying to make a point. That director's trying to, tell a certain narrative with that. It's, y'all just so used to these movies coming out now where the scripts aren't finished, and the ending's all cookie cutter because they shot it without a finished script. So, just stop being sensitive. It's just like, this is Prince. It's great music. Then, we're starting to censor books and censor music and censor. And we're not even taking time to really understand why, or should you? That's the key thing. It's like, just because you can doesn't mean that you should, but, yeah, but I think Around the World in a Day would be that would be amongst the gold standard of box sets. If they do it right, it could be the most perfect, because again, some of the ones that have been released, it's always, everything could be a track or two short of being perfect, but hopefully Around the World in a Day. Parade, same thing. I think Parade would be the most artistic box set, just because that material was so eclectic. So diverse, so almost experimental to a point. But Parade is more polished than Around the World in a Day. And that would be a strong, but I think it would be a battle. I know a few years ago I did an episode like which, would be the better box set, or which one would you rather have? And my consensus was that Around the World in a Day could potentially be a better box set than Parade, although Parade would be the more artistic statement. So I'm looking forward to both of those, definitely, not only because that's, like I said, the era I grew up in, and to have a cohesive box set. And like I said, if you see behind me, you got 1999 over here, which they need to release that to fit the format of these box sets. But there's only 3 Prince box sets on this side compared to those like 5 Beatles box sets over there. So yeah, y'all got some catching up to do, Prince estate. So I'm looking forward to both of those. Hit and Run 1 and 2 on vinyl. Ooh. I'm leaning towards wanting to get those just so I can say I have them on vinyl. I've got the CDs for both. Artificial Age, like I said, is probably the greatest 21st century Prince album. I think I might, like I said, just to say I have them on vinyl. There are things I like on both records. I know a lot of fans prefer Phase 2 than the Phase 1. I think Phase 1 was a continuation of Artificial Age, to where Prince found that perfect balance between being classic Prince and, adapting to the sounds of today. Better, much better than what he did in the 90s. To me, I think it executed better now than what he was doing in the 90s, like say trying to incorporate hip hop. And not all of it was bad, but like I said, I think it was trying to figure it out to where now you have an even older and wiser Prince to figure out how to find that balance again. So, like I say, just to say that I have it on vinyl, that's a good one. Piano and Microphone, the tour. That was announced as a possibility for release. I'm hoping it's a box set. Uh, I mean, if you do like especially if you do a double CD of that, if it's going to be just a standalone release, if it's a double CD of the highlights, or here's a challenge to the estate. Here's the challenge with the beautiful ones, because Prince only gave us 100. I mean, not 100. He gave us 50 pages of handwritten material. I mean, he was working, and to me, those 50 pages are probably the most important 50 pages you will ever read on Prince. Period. To the point, I wish he had 100 pages. I keep hoping that like they'll find like 50 or 75 more pages in a drawer somewhere at Paisley Park, or they'll find it in a box somewhere as they're archiving material. Or, Prince being Prince, kind of like, like the classic, I don't listen to Jimi Hendrix, but, something like that, to where, okay, maybe he put it on a tape somewhere, maybe he taped some ideas or something. But since we only got those 50 pages, since he revealed a lot during that tour, here's the challenge for the estate. Now, if you're going to make it like a standalone, say 2 to 4 CD set of the highlights, here's the challenge. Because apparently, especially as the tour went on, there would be a different story inserted. Now, the challenge would be, like I say, how to put it together, especially if you're talking about like a different story that precedes the same song. How do you execute that if you're just doing the highlights? But those highlights would tell the complete Prince story in that piano and microphone if you did the highlights. That would be the challenge. 2 to 4 CD, the highlights. Now, you might have to get creative. And maybe edit the spoken word stuff, or maybe make that the bonus disc. I don't know. But if you do the highlights, then yeah, if you do like try to string together a story, just on the, like do like a highlights disc is like your 4th disc or something, or 3rd disc or something, and then have your first couple of CDs just focus on the actual songs and try to thread together the highlights to simulate a complete show. You could do that. But other than that, if you can't do that, or if that's not a possibility, then of course what I would prefer would be a box set of the tour. So that would include the Paisley Park quote unquote rehearsals, or whatever, dress rehearsals, whatever you want to call it, but the shows at Paisley Park, and then you've got the different shows of the tour ending with that tour in Atlanta. That way you still get the complete story somewhat. I know sometimes with a lot of the box sets, especially live ones like that, there's all that repetition because it's roughly the same songs. Maybe one's performed differently one night as opposed to another, or one's performed better one night as opposed to the other. And you get that overlap, and it can be exhausting unless, like I said, you're the die-hard fan, and you're going to keep going back to that well a lot with that. But I would still, for me, prefer to have that complete tour because of that. Like songs hitting different one night versus another, one story being told as opposed to another. And I know it gets very personal, but I think that because that was done in public, performed in front of an audience, I think him being an open book in that manner is better than potentially any documentary at this point until proven otherwise. So for me, box set for the piano microphone tour. So Round the World in a Day, Parade, definitely most excited about those. Hit and Run phases 1 and 2. I've got the CDs. Like I said, I might get the vinyl just to say that I've got the vinyl. And then piano, microphone, I'm hoping for a box set. Otherwise, 2 to 4 CD release of the highlights. And if you can kind of insert those stories in a way that kind of makes those 4 CDs more like a narrative as well. Or if you could do it in 2 to 4 CDs. If you could tell it as a narrative, that would work as well. But let me know what you think. What are you most excited for? I know there was a lot of other stuff that was announced. I'm not really, for now, not interested in the sort of romantic comedy, but I would prefer that, especially if Ryan Coogler's behind it. I would prefer that over the Broadway show of Purple Rain. The documentaries, just going to wait till they make some announcements, like when they announce the director, what's the format, what's the narrative. And even with all that, not going to count it until it is actually in production. And even then, I'm not going to count it until I see a trailer. So, but like I said, when stuff comes out, we'll cover that more. Like I said, we'll do some episodes, like I said, focusing on, like I said, a lot of the artists that we lost recently. Like I said, probably the first will be the Pepe Willie. I'm going to do 94 East, cover that. Like I said, if not this episode, probably maybe the next 2, probably. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff I got to catch up on, especially Patreon supporters. Be patient. Like I said, there's exclusive material. Also, your submissions for videos as well. Got to get to producing those as well. So I didn't forget, but the celebration and all the updates, that was some exciting stuff to report on. So going to get jumping on the Patreon stuff. So become a Patreon supporter. Also like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. And until then, create your day, create your life. Peace.